Hello everyone and welcome. Good to see you. Hope the holidays treated you kindly. Hope you had a good Christmas, and I hope, of course, that the good Lord blesses you in every way in the coming new year. We're going to get right down to business here. Read you some correspondences from a man named James Faedke. And I first brought you James's first share last March, and of course after talking to him on the phone, and he has so many, that was just the tip of the iceberg of his encounter. So we're going to go ahead and start over from the very beginning. Hey Barton, I didn't think I'd be typing this out. This might be kind of long. If for some reason you don't want to read it all, I'll leave my number at the end, so you could scroll down at some point, leave me a text or call me, and I would be able to call you back after work or when I'm not busy with the kids. I guess I'll start from the beginning, because then you can see how I felt about it before I seen it myself. I'm a little embarrassed to admit some of this, but I really don't know this other guy that good. He was a friend of mine, and I couldn't figure out why someone would make up such a story. So this all started in 2003 when my girlfriend at the time, her little brother was living down the road from where I grew up. I lived on Hilltop Street, Cedar Lake, Indiana, 46303. He lived on a dead-end road furthest north off Hilltop. It's 128. The place, I believe, it's one road south of Vermilion Street if you want to look it up on Google Earth. I'm 23 years old in 2003. I work construction building houses, and after work I'd stop by my girlfriend's little brother's house and drink a few beers. When I seen this, I didn't have a drop of liquor that night, but when Kevin saw this 4 foot tall owl, he had quite a bit to drink, and he wore really thick glasses also. I didn't know Kevin that good. I think he was maybe 20 years old, but he left on foot from Dennis's house to walk home one night after drinking. The next day I stopped by Dennis's house to see what he was up to after work. As we're sitting there, Kevin stops by, sits down, and starts to say, "Last night when I was walking home, I took the trail in the woods instead of walking all the way around because it's a shortcut. There's 5 dead-end streets in a row." So Kevin says he was cutting through the woods and thought someone was hunched over in the dark about halfway through this strip of woods. Then he tells us that he asked who's there, thinking it was a person. He said it jumped up off the ground and flew over his head, and added it looked like a 4 foot tall owl, and it looked like it was carrying something. He said it screeched at him as it flew over his head. We were all silent, listening, because we didn't know what he was talking about. But he just stared at us like he was waiting for something. I personally thought he was telling us some kind of joke, and it just wasn't a good one. I'm a little bit ashamed of this part, but honestly I think I laughed first. And then everyone was laughing, because he wasn't joking and we weren't buying his made-up story. He didn't even try to defend himself. After we all laughed, he kind of just looked away for a second. I forgot to tell you, this town Cedar Lake is in northwest Indiana, which I've lived in my whole life as an outdoorsman too. Kevin isn't the outdoors type, so I'm thinking, dude, I'm not believing this shit. Not only am I an outdoorsman, I grew up right down the road from Dennis's house when I was younger. We were always outside, even late at night, and I never seen an owl bigger than a foot tall. So I assumed he was lying. Not sure why, but just what I thought. Then wanted to see how far he was going to take this lie. I tell him, okay, if you've seen this big owl, take me to the spot where you've seen it. Since it was right across the street in the woods, I figured I'd get another laugh by making him show me where it was at when he seen it. He says, okay, and I think it's just me and him going to look. Dennis was playing video games like he always did, and he even paused it and got up with the other 2 people there, and we all went to look. We get to the trail, and explained where he was standing when he noticed it sitting on the trail. Then he walks to almost the halfway mark of the trail and said, "This is where it was when I asked who's there." Now I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and look real good for any signs that maybe there's some truth to what he was saying. Barton, I looked good and I saw nothing. I looked back at Kevin and said, "There's no scratches on the ground, no blood, no feathers, no animal fur, nothing." My exact words were, "Why? How far are you going with this make-believe story? I guess the joke's on us for following you over here." Everyone started to laugh at him again. He still didn't defend himself, like he wasn't trying to make us believe, he was just telling us. Then before I started to walk back to Dennis's house, I get back in the air conditioning. I asked him, "Why an owl? Owls aren't even scary, so why not pick something scary if you're going to make up a lie?" Finally he says something to me. He just says, "F you." I laughed, but was still a little confused. I stuck around until he left that night, and I asked Dennis, "What's the deal with Kevin?" He just kind of shrugged and laughed. I said, "No, really. Why would he make up such a crazy lie like that?" Dennis laughed and said, "I don't know." Then I asked, because I'm not a bully or never have been, I asked Dennis, "Is someone abusing him and this is his way of acting out?" Dennis said again, "I don't know. Not that I'm aware of," and laughed about it. I thought it was a little weird, but after that, when I'd see him somewhere, I'd tell him, "Don't let the 4-foot owl get you." Figured if you're going to lie and we can prove or disprove it, you're going to have to deal with us talking shit and making fun of you then. When I tell him this, most of the time he would ignore me. Every now and then he'd give me an FU, which only got me to laugh at him more. Now after he told us that, we would hear loud owl calls across the street from Dennis's house, like even with the window shut and the AC on. We could hear them over the stereo at times. Sometimes it would piss Dennis off because they wouldn't stop, so he'd open the slider window facing the woods and rip a beer bottle and cuss something at them to shut up. Had I knew then what I know now, I would have been recording audio of these owls hooting back and forth. At times they sounded almost like jungle monkeys. I've heard that myself. I never gave it much thought after Kevin told us, but now we can fast forward from 2003 to 2007. This is early March. Josh is another buddy of ours, and he lived 2 roads south of Dennis's road. Me and Josh decided to walk over to Dennis's house and hang out for a while. It was warm for March, so we walked over, cutting through the same patch of woods. Josh was in front on the trail. I was behind him. Walked over, cutting through the same patch of woods. Yes, Josh was in front on the trail and I was behind him. We were cutting through the opposite way Kevin was when he said that happened to him. But like said, I never believed him, so it was completely out of my mind that many years later. We could hear something running on the leaves coming towards us pretty quick. Me and Josh both realized it's a neighborhood dog, a pit bull that has been known to bite at cars when they go past its house if they're moving slow. I'm 6'1". Josh is like in the low 5 foot somethings. I'm not sure how tall he is, but I turn to run and see a way out by jumping and grabbing a branch and pulling myself up. I started to worry for Josh because now it's just coming for him and he's not going to be able to jump up and grab the same branch and get away. I knelt down on the branch and told Josh to jump and grab my hand and I would pull him up. At the last second, Josh jumps on this small sapling tree and climbs it fast like a rope. He barely got away in time, and Chico, this pit bulldog, is just biting at the base of the sapling. Then he would come over to my tree and try to bite at the bark and base of my tree. We both were like, what the F? Who lets this mean-ass dog just roam around at night? We were up in those trees every bit of 15 to 20 minutes. I was fairly comfortable. Josh, on the other hand, had to just hold on suspended like he was on a rope. He couldn't get too high up it, or it probably would snap off because it wasn't very big. But he was up just enough to stay out of reach from Chico jumping up and biting at his shoes. Finally, the owners yelled for it. LOL. It bit at Josh's tree one more time, kind of snorted, and then ran towards its house. We waited for a little longer because not sure if it would come back right away. We finally got down. I was laughing at this point because we were safe, but Josh was pissed because he had to hold on to that little tree for so long. We got to Dennis's house and told him what happened, and told him if he see the owners, tell them not to let that dog run loose. 2 weeks later, we probably shouldn't have done it again or grabbed one of our guns to protect ourselves, and I really wish one of us had done just that, but it was a repeat of 2 weeks previous. So this is like middle of March, still no leaves on the trees yet, or no brush has grown in to block view. You can see all the way from one street to the next, looking through. Only difference is this time, as I'm in front leading and Josh is behind me. We get to almost halfway point in the woods where there's an incline going down to a 3 foot or 4 foot ditch you have to jump over. Before we got to the incline, we hear leaves moving from something running. I think we both thought, oh no, it's Chico again, but realized it was a large raccoon and it was running away from us too. I think we both put our guard down, like thank God it's not Chico. So I started to walk, getting to the edge of the incline, and I hear most out of place noise. It sounded like when someone very heavy jumps off the old wooden diving board noise. I stopped dead in my tracks, just trying to figure out what I just heard and what I'm still hearing. I started to scan behind me because the sound was more behind me sounding rather than in front. I'm looking around past Josh, and I could tell he was also confused as to what it was. That's when I see this long branch still whipping up and down, and then it made the whipping noise at the very tip. I'm trying to compute what I'm looking at as fast as I can because I felt like I had to. I'm looking at how big this branch is as quick as I can to come up with an answer. My brain came up with bobcat. Not that there are any even near my area, but it was the only thing I could come up with. Reaching my pockets, I hoped I had a pocket knife, which I didn't, but I don't think it would have helped if I did. I turned to Josh behind me because I still haven't made another step from when I stopped from the wooden diving board sound, and say bobcat aloud to Josh. He's still confused as I am, if not more, because at least I had a guess and was in process of my next move. This is how good we could see through the woods that night. When I turned to Josh to tell him bobcat, he actually rolled his eyes, but not saying. I didn't say anything else when I see him do that. I have to thank my grandfather who raised me a World War II vet. He helped shape me and taught me to think and react fast. When Josh rolled his eyes, I knew I was on my own to help save us from what were jumped out of a branch that big. This must be autocorrect, you gotta love that. With enough force to make the sound it did, and then not make a sound when it landed in the leaves. Logically, bobcat was the only thing that made sense, even though that still didn't make much sense. I don't think everything went into slow motion yet. I'm still twisting or pivoting, looking and scanning for a bobcat to pounce from the ground, so I'm not sure how many seconds I was scanning the floor of the woods looking for eyes, but it was long enough to give up looking behind me and started to scan in front, even though the noise didn't come from in front of me. Thank God I did start to look forward, because I caught black movement above the empty treetops with no leaves. If it was warmer out and leaves would have been blocking the view and reducing sounds, I wouldn't be here telling you this right now. Or Josh would have probably been locked up in a crazy place, or charged with my disappearance and possibly murder if he had blood on him and couldn't find me. I'm sure of it. Or even the other way around if Josh was first again this time. I may not have been able to put it all together in time. I started to see a black mass in the gap of small branches in the surrounding trees. Then I believe I went into super slow motion. I remember thinking, what am I looking at? I was getting bigger with no sound, and I'm just confused even more because now I found what made this sound. and I'm looking at it. Still don't know what it is. As it gets closer, it's coming through a gap, and it's not straight down, but almost like a steep angle, like maybe somewhere in between 60 to 75 degrees, like that steep, so I don't have a side profile even yet. But the next thing I noticed was two big ass yellow eyes with black centers. I was confused enough thinking Bobcat was the only reasonable explanation, but now I'm just lost for thought of what I'm even looking at. Funny the saying deer in the headlights, maybe because that's the first time a deer sees something other than dark in front of it most of the time. But I just kept staring at it in slow motion. As it got closer, I could see how big its eyes really looked. I'm glad you wrote books about inhumanoids, Barton, and you know there's some weird stuff out there, because I honestly feel alone. There's channels on YouTube nowadays for UFOs, Bigfoot, these wolf creatures. Then there's me, Josh, Kevin, and a few friends and family members I've told this to. I'd say 90 to 95% of the people I know don't know this happened to me and probably wouldn't believe it if someone were to tell him something like this. When I tell you these estimates, they're underestimates and not overestimates. Barton, the yellow eyes on it were at least baseball sized and probably more like softball, to tell the truth, not kidding either. I would pay out of my dime a lie detector test and hypno-regression if someone wanted to record it while being hypnotized. They can ask me whatever. They can ask me whatever they want, and they have to ask me a list of my questions too while I'm under. The eyes had black rings around it. The rings were at least 2 to 3 inches, if not bigger. They looked like about how big a mini kid's basketball or volleyball size. And I could see a few inches in between these black rings, and I could see a few inches on the sides. So imagine how big this thing's head has to be to have those circles fit on its face and have room in between and on the sides before it rounded back to the sides. I was in awe and disbelief at the same time, if that's possible. I still didn't move my feet at all for these seconds at the beginning. I think my brain didn't want to believe what I was seeing, so maybe that's why I didn't move or try to run yet. Not sure. But after I got that look at its dark grayish face, I could start to see its belly out in front of me, still on an angle, but finally in view. It was like nothing I ever seen in my life, on any animal for that matter. I almost can't describe the color of silver the belly was. For that matter, I don't know if its shiny belly was making me woozy, but I started to feel very nauseous, like when you're in a nightmare and you just want to wake up or snap out of a bad dream because you know it's going to get bad. I can even remember for a millisecond I wanted to lay down, curl up in a ball, and play dead, like it would go away or something. At this point it has to be in the 20-foot range, away still on a dive bomb from almost straight up down to me. The silver on its belly looked like if you took silver glitter almost and wet silver spray paint and sprayed it on its whole chest and belly to the bottom. I could see they were like hanging down feathers, almost like if you made a super tiny paper shredder and had a sheet of thin silver with wet silver paint, maybe, I guess. Like I said, I've never seen anything so shiny and not be polished silver. There was a black dot grid pattern on his whole belly, and not sporadic at all either. It had to be little black feathers sticking out perfectly like that, like zero staggering. I'm not sure how many times my eyes looked in those milliseconds at its face, then its belly, its face, then its belly. I wanted to believe someone made this and lights were going to pop on and a bunch of people were going to laugh at us. Either way, I decided to believe what I was seeing and step back or turn and run. But nothing. I couldn't move. I even looked down for a fraction of a second to see why my feet wouldn't move or what was holding them in place like concrete. So I don't know if it was God teaching me a lesson, especially since I made fun of Kevin, probably the worst, only because I thought he was lying, but I couldn't move my feet and nothing was in the way. I turned real quick to see if Josh was behind me still. I thought if he was, maybe he could at least push me out of the way. I could turn at the waist, thank God, but when I did this to see if Josh was there, I see him with his head sticking out from around the tree I climbed 2 weeks prior. It looked like his eyeballs were going to fall out of his head too. This was all in slow motion. I snapped back because last time I took my eyes off of it. It was in the 20-foot range and closing in, still in a dive motion. The only thing I could come up with was to try and dive with my upper body behind me and hope it worked. It definitely played out better than my head, haha. I twisted my upper half, dove with everything to my left behind me. The good news is it sort of worked. My feet went with my upper half, but not very far, like maybe a foot. So now I'm panicking because I didn't land far, but I'm on my face and belly face down. I flipped over as fast as I could, so now I'm doing a crab walk, I guess, where you walk backwards on your hands and feet. It was like the girl in a scary movie when the bad guy behind her and she trips and falls and gets killed. I was at the top or the start of the incline of the ditch, so as I'm looking up, this thing is maybe 10 feet away and still in diving motion. I started to crab walk up the little bit of incline, so I'm struggling. Thank God my left shoulder hits the little sapling tree Josh climbed like a rope to get away from, Chico. I put my arm over my head and in one motion on my left side, I pulled myself around the little tree, pulling myself up to a squatting position. That's when, if I could have been standing, instead of squatting, ducked down, I probably could have leaned and reached out and touched its belly. That's how close it was to me at the last second before I got around the tree. Instead of diving into the tree, it lifted up its head and opened its wings right in front of me. I could hear them, I could feel them. As it backpedaled for a second, it sounded like a Huey helicopter in the distance, and almost slow motion sounding, like the thump 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 from its wings cupping the air. It then tried to dip its head. I thought for some reason I was finally safe because I had the sapling in between us. It dipped its head and tried to come around to my right, its left side, and dropped a little doing it. I was in a squatting stance still, and I moved to my left a little bit, trying to keep the tree between us. It then kept backpedaling and tried to dip its head on its right, my left. I went back to my right side more, and it cant back to its left side to meet me. I went back left again, and I thought, or maybe I even said aloud, but I said, oh God, this thing isn't going to stop. As soon as I said it, it kept pedaling its wings as it turned around and flew up in an empty top of a big oak. When it landed, you could hear the empty branches slamming together. It looked like an overweight Batman person sitting in a treetop. Like its back, I guess it's supposed to be, was so black it was darker than the night sky with its silhouette. The ears made it look like how Batman ears are of proportion to its head. When it was trying to get me around the small tree, I got a good look at its ears too. They were almost horn-shaped, like they look like Batman's do, but hooked inward a slight bit, and tufts at the tips. The horned ears were almost a foot tall. They couldn't have been any less than 10 inches. I know that for sure, seeing them that close. Its beak was all black. I never saw its legs sticking out when it was diving or when it was backpedaling to try and come around the tree. I guess I kept my eye on its eyes for a sense of direction to predict which way it was going to move, maybe. Not sure. Maybe it was shock that makes me not remember. Like stress overload. I heard stories of people that experienced shock trauma, and I don't know why I would be able to twist my upper half if I was in shock. I mean, it would explain why I couldn't move my feet maybe, but then why was I able to twist my upper body to dive? Maybe you can tell me or have an idea about that. That's why I'd like a professional to hypnotize me while someone asks me questions about it and other stuff I've seen. Other than owls shouldn't be anywhere close to the size of this thing. Nothing supernatural happened. Except when I got around that little tree and thought I was safe and it opened its wings. The inside of the wings were almost like camouflage with whites, light grays. It was almost like it got lighter out being underneath those. Like if someone lit just one birthday candle on the ground below it. I'm not trying to say a light appeared. I'm saying Like at night, if it snows, there's snow on the ground, the area gets a little bit lighter out. Like you can see more outside at night if snow's on the ground. But when it opened its wings, they had to be minimum of 12 feet, but probably closer to 15 or a little bigger. And just from the bottom of its belly, where I could see to the top of its head, was at least 6 feet or bigger, not including the ears, which were probably a foot tall. I was saying, so there's almost 7 feet, and that's not including the legs I never seen, or maybe don't remember. So I'll get back to what happened. I just wanted to give you everything I remember, being a good researcher like you seem to be. I'm hoping you run across more people that have seen these rare birds, if that's what we're calling them. I don't know what to think. I'm just glad I got a really good look without any injuries, and Josh was with me, so I know I'm not crazy. Josh doesn't like to talk about it, but I might be able to get him to, but he really doesn't like to talk about it. I tell him it didn't go after you, it was after me the whole time. But I don't want to take my eyes off it sitting up in the treetop. It's so black on its outside, I feel like if it jumped off the tree I might lose track of it, which I really didn't want to do. At the time I'm trying to and do find a decent sized stick. I tell Josh to pick up a stick, and he's now behind me saying something. I keep ignoring him, telling him to pick up a stick again, and he's still trying to tell me something. I say it again, getting annoyed with him because I think it's taking a breather and coming back for round 2. I tell Josh I don't want to take my eyes off of it. He started to tap me on the shoulder. Finally I turned around kind of pissed and said, what the F could be more important than keeping my eyes on that effing thing? He gets pissed at me and points behind me and says, look. And I'm like, what? He starts to point out behind us, spread out every 10 feet or so. There's smaller ones in the tree watching us. We can see their shape. We can see the glare of their little bit of their eyes. They were almost 3 foot tall, but no pointed ears yet, like the big one had. I say, oh shit, and look back towards the big one sitting there. It does the infamous owl turnaround, and this time the eyes weren't yellow, they were red. I have a theory as to why too, because when it was close, there's no doubt it had yellow eyes. When it turned to look back at us, sitting in the treetop, it was now high enough and looking in the direction of the old style orangish street light we walked past to get on the trail. So I think its eyes reflection was now bouncing off the street light, which if I hadn't seen it close as I did, I probably would have thought the devil himself was after me and not these crazy weird giant owls. It then jumped out of the tree and flew in northeast direction away from us and Dennis's house. We made a run for it then, turning our backs to the little one still there. When we made it to Dennis's house, I didn't even bother knocking. I just opened his door and went to the window facing the woods across the street. Dennis is like, what's the matter with you guys? I tell him, you remember Kevin saying he saw a 4-foot owl? He says, yeah. Then I said, well, they're not 4 foot if he's seen the same one, because they're bigger than I am. Dennis believed me and said maybe that's what the big ones making noise sometimes are then. We waited a while before we had to cut back through. I went to my father to ask if he's ever seen any horned owls that big in town. And he told me in the early 1980s he was outside smoking and one about 3 foot tall landed in an oak tree in our front yard. So when I told him, he was like, it was how big? I said, I know I've only seen them in the 1 foot range until tonight. After work, I went out and bought a Sony camcorder, the one with night shot they made in the late 90s, early 2000s, and loaded my Ruger up with 25 round mag. Got a couple packs of cheap hot dogs to throw out for the raccoons to feed, and hoped I'd get a second chance. Except this time, I don't need to try to get away. Me and Josh never seen it again. We sat out there when we had free time. It was going to play out different this time. I told Josh we can maybe sell it to a college. Maybe they want to study it and we could split the money. It's always been in the back of my head since. Now, I'm not very good with tech stuff, but I did try to look up anything I could on the internet, looking and hopefully finding some clues or answers. I can send a text if you want about what I found, if you'd like to hear, but I did run across something interesting called the Mothman, and it made me wonder how many times someone that really thinks they've seen the Mothman might have seen one of these giant ass owls, and its eyes were reflecting back red. And in 2015, I believe it was when all those people saw the flying cryptids in Chicago, which is only 50 miles away. And some of the people actually reported seeing a large black owl that's seen it close. So it really has me wondering, or who knows, maybe people were seeing 2, 3 different things flying around. Not sure, I wasn't there. I only know what I saw. Oddly enough, the next year, me and Dennis got surrounded by at least 3 Bigfoot, not even 2 miles away from where this happened. Hopefully you eventually get my sightings and reports of these giant owls, and you remember what happened to me, and I get some answers finally. Thanks for your time if you read this. So, there are many researchers would tell you, James, that they feel that memories of unusual or atypical owls are often false memories designed to mask what really happened. In other words, a lot of researchers claim that the owl memories are implanted by alien beings to hide the truth. So if you or your friends, Kevin or Josh, if you have any missing time or anything like that associated with this, these large owl encounters, I would suggest you look into that. In the same town of Cedar Lake, Indiana, excuse me, there's a Lake County park called Lemon Lake Park. It's on 133rd Avenue. If you wanted to check it out on the map, especially if you wanted to see the distance in between the areas. But before I get into Bigfoot family and park, I'll tell you briefly about other stuff. In 1999, me and my little brother and another friend went to Potato Creek State Park. I called ahead to reserve a spot. People at the desk told me I didn't need a reservation and there would be plenty of open camping spots. The weekend comes around and we pack up and head out east to this park to do some serious bass fishing. I'm pretty good at it, and I can honestly say I'm not good at a lot of stuff, but I do better than most at fishing. We get there and they tell me they're booked, no spots open. So they tell me about another spot a few miles away. We go check it out. There's no lake, pond, or river. So our option is to stay at that campground or drive home. I then came up with a better idea. I told them since we were renting a boat there anyway, we would rent it for the weekend, which they give you a key and a lock to park it and lock it to a boat hitch. After boat rental place closed, we went back, got everything from the car, the coolers, beer, food, tents, and told them because they didn't have any open spot, we're going to camp wherever we want now. Maybe something will open as far as the site availability. Long story short, it was like 90-something degrees all day. Me and my brother held off drinking any liquor till we had a sight. The other guy starts with a few beers and then started to drink Jack Daniel's whiskey. Looked at my brother and shook my head. Said he's going to be wasted before dark. He was laying face up, passed out in the boat all afternoon and evening. Once it was dark, we pulled off at a grill on the lake and started to cook food. And more for later, and then lunch again. In that park, the lake rules are no gas motors, just electric, and you're not supposed to pull up to shore with a boat. So we were watching out for any park rangers. At this time, I really didn't look into cryptids, so I wasn't aware of what could be around, especially in remote parts of the lake. I've heard a few different wolf creature stories come out of there, and now I'm glad we didn't do what I said we were going to, which was camp wherever we wanted. There's not much light pollution out there, so it gets dark and you can see the stars good. It was probably past midnight, not sure because not many had cell phones then, and I never wore a watch. But I started to notice a reddish orange ball of light way out in the sky. I showed my little brother and told him, I wonder if it's a planet. It's one of those rare cases where you can see it without a telescope maybe. We kept an eye on it, and it seemed to move in different directions way out there. I told him to climb over Chris and drop the front anchor, and I was dropping the rear one. Maybe it was us moving and not it. After we did that, the show started. It started to literally fly across our view of South Sky. I believe not 100% on that. But then after we could see jet and I believe airline planes, so it's the only thing moving that fast. And it would stop on a dime and change directions to a completely different angle. It looked like after a while, this is just speculation, but it seemed like maybe the jets were following it. And when they got close, it would go to the other side of the sky in seconds. Then it zoomed in like it was just outside the park property, and at that point I had seen enough. I told my brother go lift anchor and let's go to the car. Nobody's going to mess with our stuff. After we started to go in, and it shot way up in the sky, like way up, and started a circular motion. And while it was spinning a circle, a little one the same color shot out at the bottom right side while in motion, and it was making whatever movement the big one would do, and it also blinked the same reddish orange color. Thankfully it never got above us, because I thought that was what was going to happen next. But it seemed like it backed off when we got to shore by the car finally. We tried waking Chris, but he was still wasted. I kicked him a few times and made him look at what we were looking at. He wasn't happy. He finally said, "What?" And I pointed and said, "We're going to the car, just thought we'd tell you." His words, "LOL, yeah, I effing see it, who cares?" and fell back to sleep. Nothing more happened that night, just thought I'd tell you, because you asked and it was strange to us. Who knows, maybe it was a UFO. Maybe it was a new government project. Don't know. I did find out there's a military base in that direction though. Just don't know if it was related. I'll tell you a real quick one about another one that was strange, and then move on to the Bigfoot story because it's getting late and I have to work tomorrow. So I'm just trying to finish before it gets too late. It makes me wonder, all this, if the near-death experience was the reason I was able to see some of their stuff. Some of this stuff I assume he means. But then that doesn't explain why Kevin got to see a 4-foot tall owl and wasn't with me when he did. So I don't know what to think about it all. And another, a year later, down at the Kankakee River, not too far from the state line where that happened, me and Josh went down there at night to try for some walleyes, and I believe it was Area 12 DNR headquarters, but then we got out there, it's pitch black down there. We can hear something moving in the nearby woods, and when it gets close enough, it was maybe the size of a medium dog, and acted like a dog. When it wants to play, like it would run to a spot out from us, and then it would reset up in another spot so many feet away, like it's going to play or chase. And this was the weird part, it had light blue eyes. This next one, this next encounter terrified me for life and caused different effect on me spending time in the woods. It also added to the nightmare, caused it happened a year later and not even 2 miles away from where the owl incident happened. It's a little hard to admit the whole story. This was 2008 summertime. I asked Dennis if he wanted to go to Lemon Lake County Park to fish. It was early in the day. We got there, nobody was there really, which is good for fishing. Told him we should walk back to the back and try first. On the way we stopped because they had 3 dumpster roll-off bins and they were ripping down the old playground they built in the early 80s when I was a kid. It was rotting away and spots, and they were tearing it down and throwing the wood and metal together in the roll-off bins. They still had 2 cast aluminum slides left. They hadn't torn down yet, and most of it was in the dumpsters. I just wanted to clarify that before I continue. It wasn't like we were stealing the park from kids like the Grinch or something, LOL. And I normally don't take or steal anything, mainly because I don't like when someone does it to me. I was kind of ashamed of what we were doing, but we knew it was all going to get thrown away and they would be charged for the weight of its loaded past normal weight. This one messed with me really bad because I actually lost quite a bit of money and I didn't want to go back in them for a while too. So when me and Dennis see this, I asked him maybe we could unbolt the slides and come back later while the park was closed. We fished for a little while, then we left and went back to my house for tools and WD-40. We then came back just before dark and park at the buddy's parents' house to walk in and not have a car in the parking lot when they closed, and kicked everyone out before they closed and locked the gates. There was a lot of people still in the park before dark. We decided to walk out and come back tomorrow evening and try then. I'm added this because of how it was so weird we didn't do it that night and decided to do this a different night. I just wondered later if maybe we had done it the original night, maybe this wouldn't have happened and I wouldn't be telling you this right now. So it wasn't the next night because I had to work late the next day, but actually the night after. We tried again walking back in the park with some fishing poles. I had a backpack full of fishing stuff and tools. The park clears out early this time, and we already sprayed the boats down good and checked all the sizes of boats in the day when it was light out. With the park empty, the park people did their drive-through and didn't really have anyone to tell the park is closing. We sat across the lake a few feet in the woods watching. I knew they did a second sweep again from the 2 other times I stayed after dark to fish and never really did that good after dark. I had another very weird experience one of the other times staying, but it had nothing to do with the paranormal. They came back through about an hour later, just like I thought they would. I told Dennis we should be good, but still be alert and watch for anything like people or flashlights or talking. Just because we knew we shouldn't be back there after dark and wasn't sure what they would do. But we left poles cast out in this peninsula we were on. I told him maybe we should spray the boats one more time and wait another hour, and we would attempt to carry out these slides in 2 pieces on our backs. That I still wasn't sure if we could do that yet because they looked extremely heavy. When we left our poles to spray the boats, nothing had happened at that point. We sprayed them all real good, wasting the entire can and breaking some of the loose already. The plan was to go back, check the poles, wait an hour, and go for it. After we sprayed them, walking back to the peninsula, we only got a few yards when what sounded like a woman screaming for her life or being injured very badly. This changed everything and also freaked us out really bad. I thought, what the F is going on? The screaming was maybe 200 yards away, deep in the dark wooded area, but was still in between us and the poles and gear. We didn't move further. We just sat low on this asphalt trail. The trail was on a high point which dipped down in front of us before returning back into high ground on that side of the trail. So we had an excellent view if someone came running or the person harming this lady. I told Dennis I don't know what's going on, but I don't have my gun and probably wouldn't be able to help, not knowing how many other guys might be there with her. Then it was a little revealing to hear another scream that sounded almost identical and was maybe 50 yards apart. We could hear them both screaming to get together at one point. I knew it wasn't a lady at least. I told Dennis maybe it's some of these giant horned owls, and the giant horned owls after the deer, and the deer are screaming. And who knows, maybe that was deer screaming for their lives. I've heard it once before this and it sounded similar but was a little off because it did have more of a human mix with it. We sat listening for almost an hour as the screams would move around. We hoped they would move out away from us, just so I could get my gear. This is where it gets even stranger. I used to describe it as almost a mechanically sound to the few people I told. Maybe that's hard to think about, but it was a combination of screams and what sounded like a sewer lid being slid on the road. When that started to happen, I didn't even ask Dennis if he could hear it too, but I did ask him if he could feel it too. He shook his head no. It did it a few more times, and I asked again. This time he whispered, "Feel what?" I said, "I keep feeling something thump my heart every minute or so." It was a lot like the impact shock wave from a 50 cal rifle, or like when a tandem axle dump truck drops a load through the door and the truck's empty and the heavy door slams the front frame. You feel the impact when you're close. I'm in construction, and it's something I have felt that was similar to the feeling. I'm just trying to describe it the best I can. I think it worried him when I asked again, because he looked scared, and I imagine I was just wanting my stuff and to leave, not caring about the slides anymore. Then to make it worse, there was a new noise added to the others still going on. There was, I guess, a dinosaur type noise. I know I've never witnessed a dinosaur making noise, but it was close to some of the noises in the Jurassic Park movie. When I started to feel that, I really got worried, because I knew we were dealing with something that I've never ran across before. We just sat and listened, really not sure what to do. I wanted my stuff and I wanted to leave. I'm sure Dennis just wanted to leave too, and all these noises were spread out in front of and around us, in between my stuff. Eventually the metal noises stopped in front of us, enough to maybe get to my stuff. It seemed to get further in the woods, and thankfully further away from us. We could hear a big struggle in thick bushes in the woods, almost maybe in two spots, when the occasional scream and this dinosaur, almost bird noise. I whispered again to Dennis, maybe some of these big owls are attacking deer and they're fighting for their life. Dennis didn't or ever got to see these owls, even though he lived across the one-lane street from these owl sightings. But he has heard them over a dozen times during spring, but mostly summer, so he believed me, but was definitely unsure about Kevin. Dennis just nodded when I whispered that, and said deer might still be alive and they're flying up in the trees with it, or maybe dropping it from a height that might kill it. For some reason I went through that with the owls, but still very uneasy, still myself. I was just hoping they would leave if we waited them out, or at least move far enough out to get my gear and poles. After almost another hour, it was quiet again. We waited a little bit longer, cupping the cigarettes we lit. I thought if we smoke a cigarette and the noise didn't start back up, I was heading to my stuff with or without Dennis. Not only did I have a lot of money wrapped up in what I had there, my ID was in my backpack, and if something bad did happen there, guess who they would contact first? Me, when they found my driver's license. After our smokes, we still heard nothing, no more movement in the branches or struggle. No sticks breaking, no vocal sounds, and I told him, maybe they moved out away. I'm going to the stuff and we're getting out of here. Walking back finally to the peninsula, getting drinks from backpack, grabbing my wallet and putting it in my back pocket. Now I could care less about anything else. Felt like I wasn't to blame if something bad did happen. We started to talk a little louder than a whisper. I think because we thought we were okay now. We reeled in the pose. Then I said something stupid that may have changed our fate for the good. My dumb ass says, I'm not scared. If you still want to take the slide, I'm ready. Dennis still looked scared on his face, again not saying anything, just nodded. We started to walk off the peninsula again towards the asphalt trail that went around the lake. We almost got there, and then something from the opposite side of all the previous noise. This will sound a little crazy maybe, but something bipedal, because I could hear the two thumps and maybe be able to feel them in the ground I was standing a little bit, and stronger as it moved closer. We just froze and could only listen because they hadn't left, and now there's a huge one coming right for us. When it moved, it sounds like it traveled a quarter mile or more through the woods with no trails. To be honest, I've told people, the few I've told anyway, it sounded like a garbage truck with no motor Sunday being floored through the thick woods, knocking and breaking sticks, logs, trees, and anything in the way for a beeline straight for us. I've heard that before, James, myself. So it moved so fast, doing what I just told you above, but it did it in like less than 10 seconds and stopped short maybe 100 yards, like dead stopped, and didn't move after that, or at least that's what I thought anyway. Now I know it moved stealthy. The rest of the way closer from where we stopped hearing it. Didn't mean it stopped moving. It just stopped making sounds when it did. Me and Dennis ran back out on the peninsula, I guess where we thought we were safe. It was lighter there from the moon and you could see a lot better. The mosquitoes were bad. There for some reason. We both lit cigarettes up. At this point we figured that whatever it is, it knows we're there, and the plan is to ditch everything and swim across the lake. I've been there myself before too. We waited at the end next to the shoreline. I told him if it comes running or we see it now in the light, we jump in. We waited a long while just because of how terrifying all this is, and especially that now added to it. We waited, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half or maybe 2. I told him I don't know what that was, but I think it's gone. The whole time I was thinking I should have brought my gun, and I would have stayed up against a tree during that charge and took some pretty good places, hopefully a headshot maybe. I really wanted to see bad what had just scared us and could make that much noise and run that fast. Thank God I didn't have a pistol on me that night, or I'd probably not be writing this now and got us both killed too. I guess we got confident enough to decide to walk back the other way, which is a long way to get out, but it was safe because no noise was coming from that way. We ninja walked this time, LOL. We moved slow and quiet. I was first, and when we made it to the trail again, I think we thought we were safe. We get on the trail, step very quietly, and take about 10 to 12 steps. As we do this, we're walking back towards the slide, and I'm on the danger side of the trail. We're walking kind of side by side. I'm closest to the woods, and Dennis is closer to the lake of the trail. As we made those few steps, my eyes had adjusted pretty well, and I could see pretty good in the woods off the trail. As soon as we started to take those steps, I'm looking and scanning. It's weird, it was like I didn't want to see what it was, but knew I'd always wonder what it was if I didn't see it. As we get on the trail, I notice a spot that's pitch black. I could see further on either side of this black rectangle, almost looking black spot. It looked like it was almost 10 feet tall and maybe not quite the size of a semi-trailer, but same shape and maybe 30 foot long plus. I was going to tell Dennis to look at it, but for some reason I couldn't stop looking in that direction. Then it was like something was sitting down in it and stepped out and up all the way, making it taller than the box looking thing. It started to move fast at us. I still wasn't able to say anything to Dennis as it moved. I could make out the darker than everything around its shape and silhouette, even hair strands sticking off the dark shape like the box dark. It moved and I was looking at it over to my left in the woods, and when it stopped it was maybe 15 yards away. I couldn't make out facial features other than a little glare from its eyes, and they weren't glowing or any color I could see, but it stopped there and looked like it almost got even bigger or even taller a little and let out a roar I have a hard time describing still to this day. I have heard a lot of audio I found on YouTube looking for maybe a roar, hoping someone got one during this very aggressive threat bluff charge warning to leave. It moved so fast now and before through the woods. There was no way we could run or swim this. No way we could outrun or swim this beast, I presume. When it roared, not only could we hear it, I could actually feel it like wind. But it was the sound waves being that loud and deep. It was moving air towards me and down above me, it felt like. It wasn't anything above me, but it felt like this minute to 2 minutes roar made me freeze. My sternum was actually vibrating like the kid's toy, a kazoo, or like holding a plastic bag out the window on a highway. When stopped, I was already facing left at it. Then I turned the rest of the way and started to run. I ran a lot in my life for exercise, and I can honestly say I ran faster that day than I ever have before. I may have broke a record for speed. I believe I threw anything I had in my hands and must have dropped my backpack during or right after when I started to finally run on the trail and get away from this place, hoping and praying that this thing didn't come after me. I completely forgot about Dennis for a couple of minutes. As I'm running, getting my brain to work right, I'm literally thinking, I have to get the F out of here. Then I thought, as I'm running full speed still, I know where I'm at, but what was I doing back here to begin with? The thought that someone had to have heard that roar, maybe several people, did even with the window shut. So next I thought, what am I going to tell the police when they come? Because I thought for sure they were coming. They're probably going to pick me up, especially being late, and I still had to get out of the park and was pretty deep in still. I didn't know what I was going to tell them. I could even remember I was fishing and didn't have a pole in my hand, or that would have come back to me. But then I thought the slide after 2 minutes, and then I thought, shit, Dennis, I was with Dennis and I left him. I thought, what was I going to do? I didn't have a gun. I could help getting him back or away if it got him. I started to slow up after getting around the lake and closer to the parking lot for it. When I slowed down, I still didn't stop because I didn't want to go back. No one in their right mind would, especially unarmed. Then I thought, what was I going to tell his sister and his mom when he doesn't come back with me? Bigfoot got him? As I'm thinking this, I think he would go back for me if I needed help. At that point, he flies by me, running full speed. He ran too, but somehow I was way in front of him because of my reaction time and speed, I think. But when he blew past me, I looked up and said, thank you, God. I caught up to him because he didn't stop, and we got to the parking lot, ran across the fields next to 2 baseball fields, and then just a field with taller uncut grass. Through the side entrance trail to a back of a large subdivision, all the way through it and down a street past a large school to my buddy's house across the street. Got in my car, drove fast to my house, being paranoid about any patches in the woods we drove past on the way to my house. Unlocked the door, got in, locked the door behind me, which I never did when I was home. All my friends knew if my door wasn't locked, I was at home and they could hang out if I was sleeping or not. But we sat in couches across from each other, just chain smoking cigarettes for a while. We didn't say or speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and then I finally said, what the F just happened? That's it. Then Dennis finally says in his words, either that was Bigfoot back there or dinosaurs were still alive and back there. I asked Dennis, you didn't get to see it? He said no. I wasn't looking the way it came from, but when I heard that, I didn't know where to go, just followed you because you drove. We talked a little bit about and started to play video games and tried to forget it because it was so terrifying. Afterwards I would bring it up. He would talk about with just me and him a little bit, but if other friends were there, he would pretty much stay silent about it. I told his mom one day because I knew her good. She believed me, said Dennis never told me this. I said, yeah, he doesn't even like to talk about it with me much. And I was with him. I never went back the next morning to get my gear and poles. I just said F it. I didn't go back to the park, even in the day, for over 10 years. And I stayed out of the woods those 10 or more years too. I only went back after I had kids and they were old enough for me to tell them this, not to scare them at all, but but to just be aware stuff is out there, especially in the night. I believe my grandfather would have done the same to protect me when he wasn't there. It definitely changed me and how I thought about our world, because I always believed Bigfoot was out there somewhere in Canada or northwest United States, but not in my town, in this little park with no mountains. Later on, hoping to find a Aurora on the internet that was close, a guy was trying to help that I was explaining some of this to, and he suggested the Sierra Sounds and sent me the link. I was busy at work and didn't look at my phone till I was done working. I got home and was looking at my phone and opened the link after reading his message, pushed play, left the phone on, and stood in my room because I had to pee. Sorry for telling you this, but it's the truth of what happened. All of a sudden, the roar comes out of my phone on full blast, and as I'm peeing, my eyes start to water over, and I was honestly scared in my house for those few seconds, even when it was still daylight out, still and early. I thanked the guys and said, yes, it sounded a lot like that. Not exactly 100%, but it was very close. Enough for me to trigger those frightful moments after I ran. Those frightful moments when I ran. After that, I wanted to learn more about what other people see, whether I have it or not, just to prepare myself for the next time I run into something, to be able to react with a plan like a soldier and not freeze up when the bullets start flying. If I have any bravery in me, I have my grandfather to thank and what he molded when I was young. He was a World War II soldier that lived through the war, start to end, trained as a sniper through training, but was put on the barrel of a Sherman tank in the 356th Tank Battalion of Patton's 3rd Division. Then after became a police officer in Chicago's South Side and retired from there. Must have been a very tough individual indeed. His name was Vernon E. Faedke. He was the toughest, smartest, and bravest man, and definitely the coolest man I've ever known, and I miss him dearly. I'll probably send one more with more smaller stuff that happened after this, and the latest stuff too. I also had some crazy night mates and dreams that I still remember that happened and go along with all this stuff if you'd like to hear those too. Sorry if this email was way too long. Just wanted to tell most of what's happening. Maybe you'll see something, maybe I haven't in the picture. But thank you for your time. I'm sure you're extremely busy with the channel. I could never handle doing that, and not would I want that responsibility. I just wanted to share with you. Maybe it will add some peace to this crazy puzzle. Here's my number again if you want to talk again. I'm a bit of a smartass, so do pay attention to my voicemail for others that call. It's me saying blah blah blah, LOL. I'm a construction guy and I had a sense of humor before that even. So it is what it is, but if I don't answer, I'm probably working, and don't keep my phone with me for the most part because I'm breaking. So thanks James for sending that in. Sure appreciated, my friend. So, of course, me and James have been corresponding back and forth. So here's the next message for you guys. Hey Barton, I had some free time before I go to work. Hope this isn't too long to read, and I'm glad you brought up the house I lived in. When I was 4, I would have nightmares, which I'm sure all little kids have at some point. The first time I had this nightmare or night terror, it was just a bad dream. The second time freaked me out a little because it started and was the same as the first time. The third time I had it, I went to my dad and told him about it. He explained maybe it's in your blood and it's a vision because of your part Apache, which is not. He's just German like my grandparents were. I would continue to have this nightmare until I was about 7. Now, I wouldn't have it every night, but it seemed like I would have it once or twice, sometimes a month. I can honestly say I was a little different than the other kids my age and older. I had zero fear of heights and would literally climb anything I could, especially trees. I loved climbing pine trees because they're always They always seem to be branches wherever I need to grab. I'm telling you this for a reason, and I'm going to tell you about these nightmares now. When I was 4, I had the first one. I would wake up alone next to a large campfire. There was big boulders all around in the area, and a few pine trees close also. First time I woke up confused as to why I was alone and not camping with my grandpa or dad. I looked around from the campfire light hoping to see one of them. When I looked both ways to find them, all I could see was like mountainous area with limestone and grass with a few trees. After looking both ways, I turned back to the fire to find a large wolf. This was not what people call the Dogman or werewolves upright canine. This was just a regular, large, full-size gray wolf. This first time it was sitting like a large dog would sit in a house if it was laying down, but sitting up, if that makes any sense. Sitting like the Sphinx sits in Egypt. It was back a little bit from the fire, just watching me. I would panic and get up to run towards the pines, and the wolf got up and began to chase me to the trees. I remember it feeling very real in the dream when it would bite at my feet as I climbed up the trees. Its nose or mouth would hit the bottom of my shoes, almost helping me go up faster as I barely escaped. Like I said, it would happen almost every month. I would remember thinking how weird it was to wake up from sleeping in a dream and knew the wolf would be there waiting like it always was. The only difference in these nightmares was instead of the wolf sitting down like I explained, it would be in the racing or standing up, ready to run position, staring right at me. So when I'd wake up next to the fire, this wolf was already and ready to chase me as soon as I would run for the trees, barely escaping every time. When I turned 7, I had gained confidence, I guess I'd say, because when I fell asleep I remember thinking, oh no, not this again. Because I've had it so many times, I knew what I had to do to escape that wolf. The last time I had it, I was 7, and it played out different from the other one. This time, instead of running to the trees for safety, I acted like I was ... which made the wolf start running for the trees because it knew that I was going to do it already. But I went for the fire, pulled out a log on fire, and jumping, or the fire landing on its side of it. The wolf ran away, and all the nightmares about it completely stopped. I believe that nightmare changed me somehow. I felt stronger mentally and started to not fear stuff even more. I guess I felt like I had a chance when it came to whatever I would be faced with. So mentally I faced my fears at a long age. And I always wondered if a native elder could maybe interpret what the meaning is of all that, if there is any. Just thought I'd share that because I no longer had the same dream twice anymore until the giant owl. That gave me a different set of nightmares. I will explain later when I get to that point, and how and why those finally stopped. After the Bigfoots in the park that night, I had nightmares about it stepping off the black void rectangle thing, and other ones where I was back there at night when I would see them chase me on the trails. For some reason, even though I was way more terrified from the Bigfoot than the owl, but for some reason I didn't have as many nightmares about it. Makes me wonder if because we ran so long for so far, maybe that helped, I guess, wear off some of the shock. Not sure, but it does make me wonder about others having to run long distances back to their vehicle after a bluff charge, or even just a sighting, and maybe it helps settle some of the trauma. Also, I got to witness around 5 to 6 a bunch of killer bees in a huge flock, or whatever you would call it, land on a huge oak while my dad and I were talking to our neighbor in his yard. A few years later, my dad and I were fishing the same river that the other stuff happened on. We would fish the bayou. When it would flood, they would open gates to let some of the river water come in and lower the river level a little for the houses. I know this isn't paranormal, but I figured I would mention it because you said you fished also. But I thought it was a log floating or suspended a couple of feet below the surface. We were pan fishing using 6 to 8 pound test lines, so I moved my line not wanting to snag a log, pushing in the levee out the river. My dad was on top of the bridge and had a better view than me. We both had on polarized sunglasses, which I still wear today when I'm fishing. It helps a lot taking off a vertical glare on the water. But my dad asked if I can see that, and I say, "See what?" He then says, "That's a dogfish coming through." I then realized what I thought was a 5 to 6 foot long log is a dogfish or bowfin, depending on where you're from. After that day, I never swam in the river again. After that, it was quiet for some years as far as seeing someone abnormal in the woods or where I'd be fishing. I did fall out of a moving car when I was 5 also. When my mom turned to make a left, leaving our town, I pushed against the door. I hadn't closed all the way and literally rode out and tore up my elbows and knees. I knew when I lived and how to get there, knew where I lived and how to get there, so I started to walk in the dark home until my mom came back, bawling her eyes out. She said she didn't realize I was gone. She didn't realize I was gone until she got home. Mainly because my sister and girl cousin were making so much noise in the front seats. When I was 10, I got a broken heavy-duty rake handle that was broken off like a spear shape. I kicked a ball because my sister was in soccer and I would practice with her sometimes. I didn't know there was this broken off rake stuck in the ground with the metal part holding it still. So when I kicked the ball, I got the 3 foot left of the handle stuck in my ankle. My sister started to freak out, running circles around me until I told her to stop. Tried pulling the rake out myself, which made her run around like a chicken with no head. Had to tell her to stay away from me because I might fall. Now I'm holding part of the handle by the metal and hopping home. I remember telling my dad I needed help. I couldn't pull it out myself. It was my idea. I got up against the door jamb, holding on to it. My dad thought he was going to just pull it right out. I had to hang onto the trim and tried to pull my leg back as he pulled the other way. After a few attempts, he finally got it free. When he did, it was like a movie. It was squirting blood across the room like it was a fake blood shooter. I still haven't cried about all this. I get in the bathroom sink and started running water as it shot blood everywhere. Then my dad started to pull these loose splinters out of it and around this gash. I was never allowed to cuss in front of my parents, especially my dad, which used an aluminum arrow on my back end when I'd get in trouble. But I was saying every cuss word in the book as he dug splinters out. I think I was putting them together, making new ones even, LOL. I lost my spring and summer because I got a blood infection after going to the doctors and they dug more splinters out. I went home and it would itch, so I'd tear off the huge scab and was pulling more pieces out myself after the doctors. I was sleeping a lot and don't remember much other than going to the new doctor's office after sleeping almost three SMH straight. I was told by my mom. Doctor said take me to the hospital immediately, he's almost dead. We got there and I remember counting how many times they stuck me with a needle. It was like 26 times and cut me with some kind of pincher device. And then it was lights out for me. Lost that spring and the whole summer because of the blood infection. They had to do a blood transfusion and kept me there until I could walk properly again. Eventually I was released. My dad just bought an ice hut, which wasn't big yet in the 80s, early 90s. Went to the west side of our lake, which was Cedar Lake, the lake my grandfather had seen the possible USO with his something fishing. My grandma on my mom's side bought me a ski coat that had bright colors on it, which I wasn't a fan of, but wore it because of how warm it was. Now this year it hadn't snowed yet, so it was slippery pulling the hut. It was all black and had no reflectors on it either. I decided to go out of it to pee. When I walked far enough away, I started to pee on the ice because we were so far out on the lake. Then I started to hear what sounds like something cutting the ice. Seconds later, I see something I hadn't seen before in my life, which was a paraglider wing with a surfboard with a blade coming straight for me in the dark. I could see this guy's eyes get big before he turned the board away from me, my dad, and the ice hut. I go back in and tell my dad what I saw after I told him how close he got to hitting us at what was probably close to 50 or 60 miles per hour, riding the ice with the wind. I saved me and my dad's life and this other guy on the boards too. I told my kids that story not too long ago, telling them everything happens for a reason, good or bad, and you're never too young to save yours or someone else's life. It's very weird how many times that I've had near-death experiences. That's something my grandpa, dad, and me all had in common. I'd be a dumbass if I didn't believe in God, as many close calls as I've had. God does watch over His people, and when I mean His people, I'm not talking about the people that just go to church and expect God to save them. I'm talking about the people that think twice before they do something. Now I'll tell you about the only experience my grandfather told me he had that was abnormal. Him and his younger brother seen an orange ball glowing in the water. He said his first instinct was to look up, thinking it was a reflection maybe. No, it was just a big glowing ball of light under the water. And this is in Cedar Lake in the late 40s after World War II, when the lake was still super clear too. I asked what happened next. My grandfather looked at me and said, "What do you mean? What happens next? We got the hell out of there." I got a lot of World War II stories out of him, even though he really wasn't big on talking about some of it. Some things I told my dad and grandma they didn't even know. I asked him a lot of questions about combat, only because I thought I was destined to end up in the military. My grandfather was able to train as a sniper because he shot almost every day rabbits around the train yards of South Chicago. When he got off the boat, he said, with the clipboard, was telling everyone where they were needed. He tried showing the guy that said he was in a tank that he had a sniper, and they looked at him and said, "You're in a tank, LOL." My grandfather raised me after I got to my teenage years, and I can't thank him enough. Sorry for going on with his background. I just thought maybe he would paint a better picture why I did what I did later on. My dad only experience with paranormal was when a ghost showed up 2 weeks after one of his aunts came to visit me and my sister. My dad just said it looked like a bright flashlight in the house. He assumed it was a burglar and went to get up to grab a gun. He then realized he couldn't move any part of his body. His aunt came in the room telling him not to worry, she just wanted to see us finally. She got into a car accident and died in Illinois before she could get to our house. I'm going to send this part of the email off because my battery is getting low and I'm getting stuff ready for work. I'll send my UFO sighting with my little brother while night fishing to me later. I wondered if something else all related. Thank you for listening. Hopefully it's not too long to read this. I'm not sure what year this was. I know it was after my son and daughter were born, and not sure if it means anything, but this will sound a little crazy, just like some of the other things I've told you about myself. Went to lunch with a co-worker at a recently built Taco Bell in the town of Winfield near a new subdivision we were building houses in. The parking lot had all the color of the blacktop, so it was very dark. Or I wouldn't have probably noticed, but I tell my buddy, "Look, there's a praying mantis crossing the parking lot." He's like, "How can you even see that?" I've always had very good, almost super eyesight, and never had to wear glasses in my life. As we're waiting for a food order to come up minutes later, this praying mantis came what had to be of 150 feet, and not only came up to the window where our booth was, but scaled the brick, got on the outside window ledge, and was fixed on staring at just me. My buddy was basically like, "What the F?" He said, "I think it knows you, and that's the craziest thing I ever saw." It's nothing supernatural, but just thought after I remembered it, talking to my kids, I'd mention it. It did seem very odd to me, which reminded me of about fishing for bass artificially when I was 13 or 14 years old. I was wading in the water in a private lake I was allowed to fish from, their yard only. I decided to wade the water thinking maybe the neighbors wouldn't mind as long as I wasn't on any of their property. Looking behind me in the clear shallow water at minnows being chased by a larger bluegill. Then I noticed what looked like a Venus flytrap, barely submerged in the water that was only 2 inches deep. I picked up a twig to confirm that it would slowly close on the stick. I wish I would have brought it home and studied it more. I went back to fishing thinking that's weird. I didn't know we had Venus fly traps in our state, let alone one that were living in water. I think he meant to say I didn't know we had Venus fly traps living in our state, let alone one that was living in water. Later when I got older, I was telling a girlfriend about it. Actually, it was Dennis's sister, and we decided to look them up, only to find Indiana doesn't have Venus fly traps, and there is none that live in water either. This stuff really wasn't of any importance, just figured I'd mention it because of just how strange both the incidents were. I appreciate that, James. All the details are important, every single one of them, and when I questioned you over the phone, I wasn't surprised to learn that you had your entire family had a history of unexplained paranormal experiences. And what you thought started in 2003 when you fell out of that tree really started when you was very young, when you was 3 years old, when you started having these night terrors. And you told me a lot about these night terrors, a lot more on the phone than you did in your message, and hopefully we can get you to come on a live stream very soon, and you can tell everybody all the little details that you told me that weren't included in your many messages. And I sure appreciate you sending them all in, and hope everybody enjoys this video. If you do, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you're not subscribed. YouTube tells me that 54% of my viewers are non-subscribers, and then that's after it deletes 50% of my subscribers. So hit the like button, subscribe if you're not, hit the notification bell. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Just hit it on the off chance it might work for you, and you'll know whenever I drop a new video. Everything that I say on this video, and all my videos, is true. And the people that I talk to and the messages that I read, I've spoken to each of these individuals, and I know that they're on the level and not making stuff up. So I'll see you in the next video. Okay, God bless.